I know some of us feel tired, but we would like to also to have your questions on conference. You can see it on your by scanning your badge. Please do so and share your question with us. Let's move on. Navigating sustainable seas, the global perspectives. I would like to call on stage Mrs. Mette Asmussen, Lead Maritime Sector Initiatives, Center for Nature and Climate, World Economic Forum. Mrs. Fanny Lossy, Director, Environment, Maritime Safety and Offshore, European Community Shipowners Association. Mr. Vassilis Triantafyllos, Lawyer, Energy Policy Expert. And the moderator, Mrs. Natalia, Chief Governance Officer from Tototheo Maritime Ltd. Please welcome.
Hello to everybody. Thank you for your patience and for listening to us attentively. I am very honored to be here today to be able to discuss this really crucial topic with our distinguished speakers here. As the subject of the panel mentions, we are going to be discussing the global perspective when it comes to our industry's journey towards greater sustainability. There's been considerable criticism within the industry, but also from outside, that sometimes there's more talk than action when it comes to our sustainability efforts. So we're going to address the question if this is really the case, or have we actually made considerable steps forward, taking real action. I'm going to give very little time to each of our speakers to introduce yourselves, just to give a couple of words on your background so that the audience knows where you're coming from, let's say. So if you want to start.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you very much to Navigator for inviting us. I am Fanny Lossy, Director for Environment, Maritime Safety and Offshore at ECSA. ECSA is the European Community Shipowner Association, and we represent 21 national associations of shipowners in Brussels towards the policymakers, and obviously the UGS is part of our members. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm actually not sure. Oh, it is on. Sorry. I'm Mette Asmussen. I represent the World Economic Forum. I cover the maritime sector initiatives at the forum. The forum is broad on different industries, different topics. So I usually like to present myself as the maritime nerd of the forum there, and that seems to fit well in here today. Mostly the initiatives we work on within the maritime industry currently are really within sustainability and how to transform and support the decarbonization journey. And what I find the biggest strength of being with the forum is the fact that we work across so many industries and sectors, because I think the key to the transition is really collaboration outside the maritime sector as well. So honored to be here, really honored to be invited to speak here today and to be on this panel with my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much. I think it must be on.
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Vassilis Triantafyllos. I'm a lawyer and an energy transition expert. I've been advising governments, governmental agencies, and companies on the energy transition, on policies, on strategic approaches. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to exchange views with an audience that's not strictly related to the energy transition, but very, very much so will be in the future. And I'm doubly excited for sharing the panel with three ladies, following on what His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned in the morning, also Captain Tsakos, inclusion in action in our panel today. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope we have an interesting discussion.
Thank you, everybody. So let's kick off. So we're looking at the global perspective. So Mette, my first question to you. We are seeing and we're hearing different announcements about new technologies, dual fuel vessels, actions being taken, commitments being done by cargo owners, by charterers. Is sustainability a real and tangible concern, or has it remained a CSR and marketing gimmick, let's say, within the industry?
Thank you. So I'm super happy to be talking about action, because I really feel like this is the decade of change, or the decade of action for the maritime industry. So being here under the title of Navigating the Change is spot on. I think coming out of 2023, where we finally saw a very strong signal coming from IMO, that's created a lot more certainty in the industry. It's created a lot more certainty outside the industry, and I think that's what I'm really focusing on also, on like making sure that those investment signals and the certainty outside the stakeholders within the maritime industry is also there. So that's important. So that's already kind of one step in the decade of action. Another thing we're really focusing a lot on at the forum with a number of stakeholders, there's a number of levers that will basically be part of the transition for decarbonization. One we're spearheading at the forum is the demand signal. So pleased to hear also earlier that Rob was talking about how the consumer demand signal plays an important role in the transition. We started an initiative called First Most Coalition back in 2021, together with the US government, and now supported by 13 governments, and with 88 companies right now across 7 different industries, 15 companies within the shipping part of that. That initiative is really around how do you create the demand signals throughout the value chain. So from the cargo owners to the vessel owners, and then from the vessel owners towards the fuel suppliers. And it doesn't get much more actionable than that. So cargo owners basically committing to, we want to buy these goods, whether it be in container or bulk, and vessel owners committing to, we're going to be buying fuel that will fuel our vessels in the future. So it's really kind of that's an effort around how do you use your procurement power to start advancing and scaling the technologies that we need for tomorrow. So I think that's very at the core of what is action and how we need to move to an action-oriented agenda.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch up the order of my questions because you gave me a very good pass to that, and actually lead to a question about that, about who leads this transition. Should we expect society or anybody else, let's say, to create the demand for us to become sustainable, to be more environmentally aware, let's say, or should shipping remain a leader in this and act proactively towards this? And maybe, Vassilis, would you like to get us started on that, having the experience from other industries that maybe have undergone an energy transition?
Yes, and thank you very, very much for this question, because we need to put this whole endeavor, this whole energy transition concept in the right context. So, what we call the energy transition basically began as a global paradigm shift by scientists back in the 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, with the whole ozone layer concern back then. And then it was picked up by policymakers who acted on the advice, on the concerns expressed by scientists. And then we had Montreal on the ozone layer. Then we had Rio in 1992. We had Kyoto. We had the Paris Agreement lately. So basically, this is, from what I can remember, this is the first time in history when a global paradigm shift was instigated by scientists and put into action by policymakers. And this is where we are today, basically. Policy drives change. At some point, very, very soon, in my opinion, this will become a social imperative. And when we have extreme meteorological phenomena, climate-related disasters like the ones we experienced this summer, and of course, which are frequent in other parts of the world. California has them, Canada had them, Australia had them. As those phenomena become more and more frequent, and their impact touches more and more people, this whole thing that started from scientists and was put into action by policymakers will also become a social wave, a social demand, a social imperative. And when it does, I'm afraid it will be too late for those who haven't yet reacted to react to it. Because the social dimension means, of course, that this will be reflected in votes, because people vote. This will be reflected in consumer habits, because people buy stuff. When it does, you won't have time to change if you're a political party that disregards this whole effort to change how we think and how we act around energy. And it will be very, very late if you're a business to adapt to how you do business. Because then, whoever has already been positioned in this game will be way ahead of you. So yes, it is, the social dimension is not fully there yet, but when it comes, it will be too late. And it will come. It will come.
So you're saying we should act now to not regret it later?
Actually, what we say is, not what we say, what the scientists say, is that we should have acted 2 decades ago. IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the group of scientists across the world who work on climate change and how to combat it, have been very clear. They issue reports and periodic reports, and they follow, those are the top minds across the world. And they said, in the 6th, I think, report, that we're too late already. They have 6 scenarios that the most pessimistic being just doing what we do, and the most optimistic being actually changing everything overnight, stopping oil tomorrow. And what they say is that even if we magically take the most optimistic scenario, we will not be able to keep temperature change below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which means that we will have, again, this is the most optimistic scenario, we will have, and this is this is verbatim how they phrase it, we will have irreversible impact on biodiversity, on regions, on sensitive habitats and all that, even by the optimistic scenario. So I think this answers your question. It's not my answer, it's a scientific.
Thank you so much. Fanny, no pressure, but under this extreme pressure that the shipping industry finds itself, and let's say the push and the drive towards further sustainability, how do we achieve a balance between the socioeconomic and environmental considerations that are part of this drive?
It's quite a broad question, but I'd like to focus on 3 elements there. As you mentioned, now we have, and it's what Mette also said, now we have a regulatory path. So we know what we are looking at. We know the objective towards neutrality by mid-century. So it gave us this input to look into things. And as you mentioned, it's a bit a chicken and egg problem. Where do we start? Where do we start with the vessel or with the fuel, for example? So this is also something that we have been looking a lot as ECSA at the EU level, because with this new landscape that we have now, we also need to make sure that the value chain follows, that the objective that put on ship owners are also followed by fuel production and availability of those fuels. And as the representative of the Greek ministry said this morning, we don't have those fuels on the market now. So how do we achieve that goal? And part of it is having access to finance, whether that's public funding or private funding. We need to have it now, and this also is a big work we have been doing to ensure that part of the revenues of shipping decarbonization is flowing back to the sector, to make sure that we have these investments in the new vessels, but also in the infrastructure and the fuel to make them available. And to make a link maybe with the previous panel, the human element is going to be key there, because we also need to make sure that we upskill or reskill our workforce so that they are able to operate on those new vessels with the new fuels that have different safety issues around them. So a lot remains to be done in that path.
Thank you so much. I'm going to address a question to all of you because you do represent different perspectives. Where do the responsibilities lie? I mean, who is responsible to, and who should say what needs to be done, when needs to be done, and who should be taking the action? Is this on the shipowner side? Is it on the operator side? Is it on the fuel producer side? Is it on the provider side? Where do we have the starting point?
I'm happy to start out there, and I'm extremely happy to have the energy side represented also at the panel today, because I think we're really at a situation where the nexus between supply and demand is one of the things that we need to solve for. So building a new vessel will often be like 2 to 3 years. Building a plant that will be producing fuel will be a much longer time horizon, and a lot of these projects that are basically going to produce maritime fuel are not even reaching the final investment stage, and that's or final investment decision, and that's an important key factor there. Like, how do you solve for that supply-demand nexus? But then another thing you just touched on now is really, for me, it's really bringing in the entire value chain, and that also means thinking beyond the traditional maritime stakeholder value chain. Like, how do you think the value chain much longer from the energy producers to the end consumers, and really thinking about how do you bridge that with unconventional partnerships. So it's collaboration at a next level, I will almost say. It's collaboration within the maritime industry, but then the collaboration with the industries outside the maritime industry almost becomes even more at the core of where we're heading to next, in order to solve for what I will call it's almost like the shipping industry or the maritime industry has moved from a much more like linear development to what we're looking into now is a multi-fuel future. And a multi-fuel future kind of has other requirements on infrastructure, on fuel producers, on ship owners. So it's kind of across that entire value chain and working across the value chain in different ways than we've been doing before.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. If I can add on that, I agree with you that it is a longer time span that we have to look at, but also as ship owner, when you invest in a new vessel, so if you make a decision today to build that vessel in a few years' time, the vessel is going to stay in your fleet for at least 20, 25 years. So those decisions are also looking forward into that multi-fuel future, and many of our members are already installing engines that can support those new fuels. Even though they're not ready on the market now, they are looking forward and saying, okay, I'm using that fuel now, and I know my solution for the future will be that one. But I totally agree with you that it's a multi-fuel future. We don't have one solution that will fit all the shipping sector at the same time.
Vassilis, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, well, you will not often find me, being self-reflecting or apologetic or that, but I will start off by saying that the energy sector actually should have done a lot more to approach the shipping sector. Up to now, we have provided a vague sense of obligation for the shipping sector to transition, and we haven't provided the tools. And this is, of course, this is a more pragmatic approach. It comes down to what you said. We need to collaborate more. We need to synchronize our approaches better. But at the end of the day, we don't have, as the energy sector, we don't have tools ready today to help the shipping sector decarbonize. And this is something that we really should address internally. The technologies perhaps are there, but they're not scalable. We don't even have a clear idea of where the technologies will lead us yet. When we compare it with the decarbonization of the electricity sector, for example, we knew pretty early on that what the technologies would be, how we would support them, how the public funds would help scale up production from renewables and then bring the costs down so they get grid parity and all that. We haven't done the same exercise in shipping. We should do it. And we should have some encouragement from the shipping sector that our solutions are not only, let's say, technically or financially viable, but are also welcome. That you want us to spend the money, to spend the effort, to spend the expertise, to build technologies, to bring the policies in place in order to bring about the transition of the shipping sector together. So it starts by working more closely together, synchronizing, finding synergies in what we do with what you need to do. Because at the end of the day, it will be upon us, both sectors. You really have to start thinking in those terms and in this context, for example, with ATS, with other tools that we know and the shipping sector only now starts to find out. And on the other hand, we also need to scale up those technologies that will allow, and within the correct timeframes, that will allow you to act upon the obligations placed on you by the general policy environment. So yeah, more collaboration.
Thank you so much. Ladies, would you say it's the sheer diversity of shipping and the number of stakeholders involved in the entire value chain a factor that maybe contributes to this maybe unclear future, so that the energy sector could make the decisions and make the investments needed, as Vassilis outlined right now?
Maybe I can start with that. Yes, indeed, I think that the shipping sector is very diverse. It's not like for the car, for example. So it's easy to electrify your car. You go to the office and you plug, you go home and you plug. If you're a vessel, of course, if you do short shipping on a ferry, you can imagine that you're going to electrify it, because that's probably the easiest solution for you. But you have such a diversity within shipping that the solution that would fit your short ferry, for example, is not going to work for your ocean-going bulk vessel that go all around the world. So the issue here is to have those hubs to make sure that infrastructure and bunkering facility also exist at the other end of the world, and make sure that we can also bunker those renewable and no carbon fuels outside of the EU. And I think that's one of the issue that we have in shipping, is probably making things a bit more complicated, and also either for the energy sector to know what they should produce for us, but also, and we have seen it around the regulatory landscape, to explain what the best solution is, because it won't be one solution fit all.
Thank you so much. What I was further going to ask is, we are driving towards sustainability, and there's a new IMO strategy. Let's assume that the drive is there. Let's assume that energy and shipping sit around the table and they are transparent in their plans, in their goals. And actions are taken, and we are going taking positive steps towards sustainability. Could we or should we expect any negative impacts on any other spheres in terms of as side effects, should I say? For example, fuel demand, the life cycle of fuels, hull cleaning that could increase efficiency but increases the risk of invasive species, or the move towards green steel that could influence ship recycling practices. Would you like to take a go at that?
I can start.
Yeah, please. Mette?
I can start on that one. So I think one thing that we don't talk enough about within shipping, it's on the same side of this, is really we talk about it, but we don't talk about it enough in the context of decarbonization, is the energy efficiency perspective here. So in the future fuels, like in the future world, like the scarcity of fuel is already a problem now. Like the amount of fuel that we're going to need just for the early adopters of alternative fuels, that fuel is not even available. So energy efficiency becomes even more at the core of this for two different reasons. Fuel is going to be more expensive. You want to use less of it. Fuel is going to be less available. You want to use less of it. So all of the things that we're doing for energy efficiency today is actually something that we're going to be translating to the next phase of decarbonization. It's a super important. It's super important steps to take. So I think that's one of the things that's part of that decarbonization journey that we're talking about, but we're talking about in a different context. But it's extremely important in the decarbonization context, especially for that reason that if you look across the different sectors, it's not only shipping that's going to need X amount of fuel. It's also aviation. It's also trucking. It's also hydrogen for green steel. It's so there's a lot of kind of I don't want to say competing sectors, because I usually kind of look at it as the sectors can help each other. But reality is that we're looking at a lot of decarbonization challenges at the same time, and a lot of them are looking for hydrogen derivatives, and hence it just makes it even more important that we collaborate across the sectors, but also start thinking how can we then actually use less fuel, because there's most likely going to be less fuel at a higher cost. So I think that's a little bit a perspective on that question, at least from my side.
Thank you, Mette. Fanny, would you like to add something?
No, completely agree with you that indeed it's going to be less fuels, and especially if we look at those upcoming fuels that are going to be, let's say, zero-emission fuels. This is very important, as you're mentioning, the life cycle analysis here of the fuel need to be taken into account, and how you actually produce them. Are they really zero-emission fuels? And now then you can account for it throughout the entire value chain. So I'm coming back a bit to what we were discussing before, that the value chain is going to be very, very important here. Again, because we need to decarbonize everything, what we're doing, and also, as we were mentioning, the green steel is also going to be a big, big issue, because it's not only us that have to decarbonize, but the entire economy. So also land-based industry will be looking for other options. So it's going to be interesting coming years in that, but maybe you want to add.
Vassilis, would you like to add something before we give some closing?
A very brief comment. I'm very happy that you're already looking into the efficiency side of things, because in sectors that are more advanced in the energy transition, such as the electricity sector, we very well know that you cannot make the transition happen without a more efficient usage of resources. This is a rule for us, and I'm very happy that you also share that sentiment as a shipping sector. In electricity, we have this principle. This is enshrined down a principle, which is also reflected in EU legislation and in policy papers and in academic approaches by many academics and scientists and researchers. We call it the energy efficiency first principle, which basically says that when you plan the energy transition for a country or for whatever, every time you want to add an extra megawatt of production capacity, you have to see first, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis to see if you can reach the same result by reducing demand by the equivalent energy produced by this extra megawatt. So this is something that indeed must be in our planning from day one, because the returns we get from energy efficiency by using a resource better, more efficiently, are much bigger than what we get by producing an additional unit of fuel to do the same, to have the same result. So yes, this is very much so. I'm very happy that we're on the same page on that, and I'm sure this will be one of the areas that we haven't really explored enough, but will play a crucial role in the future.
Thank you so much. My key takeaway from what we've discussed is there's a lot of exchange of knowledge and transfer and information to be done between energy and shipping towards sustainability, because there's a lot we can learn from the energy sector that has undergone this with other industries potentially. What I would like as closing from you is if you can identify one or two key areas for action towards achieving greater sustainability. So I'll start with Fanny.
Well, I think that what we're trying to do now at the EU level is have this discussion on the energy production and with fuel suppliers, because we need to foster that cooperation to ensure that fuel suppliers also have shipping in mind when they look into their future investments.
Thank you so much. Mette?
Thank you. So I think I'm actually just going to mention three things. Sorry for the time for that, but I think one overarching thing that's super important, and I know that we also had in the initial kind of plan for this discussion, is remember the role of maritime. So maritime shipping is facilitating global trade, and we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at the sustainability journey we're on. That's a super important thing to keep in mind in the equation. Then the second thing of this is the collaboration across our sectors. So energy sector, consumer-facing sector, and really thinking about like how can unconventional partnerships help on bridging the price gap to some extent, because one of the things, like one of the big elephants in the room, is the willingness to pay for how the future of shipping will look like, and that's all the way at the demand side, and it's container industry is a little bit closer to the final to the final consumer. So there's also that element of different segments that are decarbonizing within shipping. And then I also just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of brave companies out there that are taking some brave decisions today already on really embracing on that journey, even though the fuel is not available, and even though we haven't really bridged the gap across the entire value chain yet. So yeah, like lots of interesting things ahead of us. I think it's extremely interesting and important that we're really combining the maritime industry with the energy sector, with the end consumers, and looking at this in a much bigger perspective.
Thank you so much, and thank you for mentioning the finance aspect as well, which is, I guess, where it all boils down to at some point. Vassilis, for your key areas to focus on for action?
Well, I think that the key areas for action on decarbonizing shipping have been, we have identified them, and we have identified at least the need to work more closely together towards achieving them. I want to highlight another dimension, another category of actions that we can actually work together, and this is where we need the shipping industry to help us bring about the transition in other sectors. And this is how the energy transition is not only, let's say, an obligation or something that the shipping industry must do, it's also an opportunity for the shipping industry to find new markets, new areas of being active and making revenues and being active. One of them, for example, is, I will just mention two, but there are many others. One of them is offshore wind technologies. Those are big, for those, most of you probably know, but those are big wind turbines in the middle of the sea that are either anchored to the bottom of the sea or they float in huge bases of concrete anyway floating. In Europe, we really count on offshore wind technologies as a major component in changing our electricity mix. Greece also launched its first law on offshore wind last year, and recently, a few days ago, we announced the first areas in the Greek seas where we will have our first offshore wind parks in the coming years. We have a target of 2 gigawatts until 2030, and this is around 6 billion in capex. So it's good business. And the projection for 2050 is up to 17 gigawatts. We need shipping. If we want to kickstart this sector, we need shipping because we rely on shipping to lay the cables, to put the infrastructure out there, also ports, which are a huge component in floating wind. This is an opportunity for shipping, and as the volume of added offshore wind capacity increases, so will the business opportunities. A second, very brief mention, because this is probably new to some in the audience, is carbon capture and storage. This is the idea that we go to emitters, we capture the CO2 they emit, and then we transport it to storage, underground storage facilities, which are basically depleted oil fields or gas fields. We have our first carbon capture, carbon storage facility right now being developed in Greece, in southern Kavala, and the first 3 major emitters, representing a very good industrial emitters, representing a very good chunk of our national emissions, have already secured financing up to 350 million euros from the EU to install technologies. The idea here is that after you capture the CO2, you have to transport it by ship to the storage facility. And I was discussing...
By an energy efficient ship, clearly.
Yeah, but I was discussing with people who are active in this and who want to do this for their companies, for their industries, top industry players, and they tell me that there are no ships available to do this today. We don't have that
So I will translate that to the key action in your mind is to realize the opportunities that lie in it and not just the obligations.
Exactly.
So we need to be closing, but I see there's a question posted, so I will ask it, and very briefly, if you can address it. Can you talk about difference between how decarbonization is viewed in the West versus the East and challenges of not having a global standard? I think we've touched upon it in different parts of this panel, but maybe with just a summary note. Who would like to take a first go at it? Mette, would you like to?
I'm happy to take a first go of it. And I think this actually comes a little bit back to the opening comment I made of the importance of the IMO framework. So shipping being global by nature, operating vessels are moving from region to region. That's why it's so important that we have the global framework for how to move shipping to the next phase. Then a different component for that is really, for me, also that we're essentially used to a ship being able to fuel in Singapore or Rotterdam or somewhere in the world, and it can go all the way around the world on one tank. There's a little bit of a network theory here also of with the future fuel. You're most likely not going to be able to fuel in one port and then sail for 3 months. So there is something about like the world gets even more connected when you need to make sure that you have the infrastructure, you have all of the pieces in the puzzle that actually enables a vessel to go from A to B to C to D, and not necessarily only from fueling in A. So there's a lot of that kind of network thinking and the infrastructure needed, and the global nature of shipping just becomes even more important in that perspective, and hence the regulation of IMO and the way we really move the industry forward under a level playing field framework.
Thank you,
yes,
Fanny.
I think that the international level playing field is key in that sense. That so we are looking at IMO now to develop this global standard, and just maybe the decarbonization difference between the West and the East. Just to a little reminder that even though we are talking about European legislation, any ship calling to the EU will have to abide for it. With it. So it means that also non-EU flag vessel or non-EU owned vessel will also have to pay under the ETS, for example. So this is also a way for the EU to show their vision, and they're also trying now to export that to the IMO. So I think in the next months at the IMO will be crucial in that sense.
Thank you, everybody, so much. If you have further questions, please address to our speakers at the very nice terrace or during the event. Thank you so much.